And while that may very well work when it comes to Allstate, but I say to each and every one of us on today that whether you have never had a collision before, as far as you know, every one of us has had a collision. Every last one of us has had a collision. And I hate to bust your bubble and take your certificate away to say I'm a safe driver certificate, but every one of us has had a collision. Every one of us. As we think about what a collision really is, a collision is simply a conflict. A collision is simply a conflict. And conflict means to come into collision or disagreement, be contradictory, at variance, or in opposition, to clash. Conflict means to come into a collision or disagreement, be contradictory, at variance, or in opposition, to clash. So just when you thought you had the perfect driving certificate and the perfect award that said, I have never been in a collision, I'm going to have to take it from you today. Because to say you have never been in a collision is to say you have never been in conflict. To say you've never been in a collision is to say you've never been in conflict, because conflict is to come into collision, to clash some kind of way. And so the question is now, have you ever been in a collision? Have you ever been in a collision? Because collision simply means to find yourself in a conflict. And we know just what a conflict is that when you come up against, when you clash, when there's a disagreement, there's a collision. We all, at some point, has been in a collision. And some of us have been in more collisions than others. Because some of us provoke collisions, and then some of us try to stay away from collisions, but yet we find ourselves in a collision. We all, at some point, has had a collision. Because we know conflict to be a collision. But wherever you find conflict, then you also can find resolution. Wherever there's conflict, then you can also find resolution. And resolution means to deal with a question, a matter of uncertainty, conclusively. It means to settle, to come to a determination. Resolution means to deal with, to question a matter of uncertainty, conclusively, to settle, to come to a determination. So wherever there's a conflict, there's a resolution. And as a driver, wherever there's a collision, at the end of it, there's a settlement. Wherever there's conflict, then there's resolution. And wherever there's a collision, there's a settlement. We all have been involved in a collision. Every last one of us have been involved in some kind of collision. The collision on one side and the settlement on the other. And you know, when you ever been in an accident or whatever, you deal with a collision initially. And then you deal with the settlement on the back end. If you ever been in a collision, and sometimes the people been in the collision, they don't handle collisions very well. And sometimes we behave very rudely when there's been a collision, and we sometimes might have to cuss somebody because they collided with us. And so we're in a collision, but then if they hit us, later we go from that anger to begin to think about there's been a collision, so therefore there's going to be a settlement. Because where there's a collision, then there's a settlement. Where there's conflict, then there's resolution. So I asked you, have you ever been in a collision? We've all been in a collision. Because we have all collided with somebody at some point. If you ever been married, you've been in a collision. If you ever grew up with some siblings, you've been in a collision. If you ever had a parent and they wouldn't let you do what you want to do, you've been in a collision and you probably lost. But you've been in a collision. Because there's a conflict that needed to be resolved. Conflict resolution. Are you a safe driver? Are you a safe driver? Driver. And the dictionary says driver. Driver is a person that calls and guides the movement of a vehicle, person, or animal. A person that calls and guides the movement of a vehicle, a person, or animal. When you're the driver, you're the one that calls and guides the movement of a vehicle, a person, or animal. And to drive simply means to force to work or act. To drive means to force to work or act. And so when you're in your vehicle, when you accelerate, what you're doing is you making it force to work and to act. And as the driver, you are the one that calls the guide the movement of the vehicle or the person. Because when you're the driver, it don't drive itself. You are the one that determines the movement of the vehicle. You are the one that determines the movement of a person. Collisions therefore come from when a person calls and guides the movement of another person. A collision therefore comes from when a person calls and guides the movement of another person. When a person forces another person to act. Are you a safe driver? Collision therefore comes from when you, a person, calls and guides the movement of another person. When a person is forced another person to act. We've all been in a collision. Every last one of us. And the thing about collision, depending on how bad the collision is, determines on the chances of survival. How bad the collision is determines the chances of survival. Because some collisions are so bad that it takes what they call the jaws of life to go and cut a person out of the vehicle that they're in, because they're so impacted and the car is so much wrapped around that it takes the jaws of life to get them out. The jaws of life is a very powerful cutting device used to extricate a person out of a vehicle that has been in a serious collision. The jaws of life is a very powerful cutting device used to extricate a person out of a vehicle that has been in a serious collision. If you've ever been driving somewhere on the highway or whatever, and you see them with the jaws of life, you realize that somebody has been in a serious condition.